Cam Edwards of Bearing Arms on the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the problem of political violence. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over today and check out our free weekly newsletter if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America. This week, we are discussing the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the rise of political violence that represents. And to do that, we have with us from Bearing Arms, Cam Edwards. Thank you so much, Cam, for joining the show. Last minute, we kind of had to switch up guests, and I'm just thankful that you were available because you actually have a really good piece that I want to get into discussing all this. But welcome back to the show. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate it. It's been a little while, and I'm glad I was able to step in and pinch hit. So thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. You're always one of our most popular guests, too, when you come on, I think for good reason, because you have a lot of great insights and also are a good person to interview. So
Appreciate that.
a lot of radio experience as well, too, right? You do interviews every week over there at Bearing Arms, where you're the editor. So I think our episodes together are usually some of our best. And I hope that can be the case today, because we're talking about a very serious and sad story of political assassination, or the assassination of a high-profile political figure in commentator Charlie Kirk. And you have this great piece over at Bearing Arms where, you talk about the title is "We've Denounced Political Violence, Now What?" And I am thankful, one, I think, as you acknowledge in the piece, that the vast majority of people reacting to this killing are not celebrating it and are, in fact, condemning it, right? I guess we just start there. One, that's a positive sign as far as the majority of what we've seen in response to this, right?
Well, absolutely. And, that was good to see. I mean, the sad thing is, I think it's maybe the soft bigotry of low expectations, to borrow a phrase from George W. Bush, because that should be the case, right? I mean,
Yes.
When somebody is murdered, we would expect that would be condemned. So on the one hand, yeah, it's great that the vast majority of people out there, are denouncing political violence in any form, but it's a pretty low bar, right? And the sad thing is that we've also seen a substantial number of individuals who have been either openly celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder, have been sort of, feigning apathy, this sort of, snarky response, like, oh, what's for dinner? Taco Bell, bring back empanadas. There is a significant number of individuals who refuse to recognize Charlie Kirk's humanity. The disagreements that they may have had with him politically, the problems that they may have had with what he said, his ideology, are getting in the way of them recognizing that a human being lost their life, that a wife lost her husband, that two kids lost their father, and that alone is that alone should generate some sadness when you think about it, and it does not for those people. And that's deeply disturbing and is deeply troubling.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say that you don't need to agree with Charlie Kirk, his opinions or methods or anything, to find that somebody shooting him in the middle of a crowded college campus as he, expressed his political beliefs is abhorrent, right? It's disturbing, and it's a terrible thing to want to see happen in a free country. This is not. It's just there's no justifying what this killer did, regardless of any of that, right? And it does speak to maybe some of your own personal experiences, right? I mean, you wrote about this in your piece. You've lost loved ones in the past, and because of your profession, right? Your public advocacy, as a pro-gun media figure, you've experienced some of this on a personal level as well. Some of what we're seeing, I guess, in the nationwide level right now, because Charlie Kirk was, obviously very well known, one of the most well known commentators in the country. You've gone through this personally, where you've had both those reactions as well. Most people were kind. I think one of the things I took from your piece on this is sort of trying to make sure that we can recognize the humanity of people in these moments.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, since 2022, I've lost my oldest son. My wife died on January 1st of this year. And, even back in 2022, like I did get a little bit of that, right? I had people within the gun control movement. That's what I wrote about. People who definitely disagree with what I believe and what I preach and my own ideology. A couple of them reached out with very, very pro forma, thoughts and prayers. But several of them reached out with genuine sympathy and empathy, asking, how I was doing, asking how the kids were holding up, asking what they could do to help. We had conversations. But then I also had people who did say, these were people online that don't know me. I don't know if I've ever interacted with them before, but because of what I do, their response was good. I hope you feel pain. I hope you now know what it feels like to lose somebody. And maybe that will get you to change your mind, right? Or maybe this is divine retribution maybe this is karma coming back and biting you in the butt for, standing up for the right to keep and bear arms. So yeah, I did get that. I mean, this is nothing new, right? But I think what's different here is that we've not seen this on such a widespread scale. I think we saw a little bit. I think we saw a lot of this actually when Brian Thompson was murdered in December. Again, you saw this sort of glee in some quarters of the left about a CEO getting gunned down in Manhattan. There was. I think it is fair to say that there are some folks who have turned Luigi Mangione, who is accused of murdering Brian Thompson, into a folk hero. Which in itself is not necessarily new. I mean, you can go back and you can look at, Sacco and Vanzetti in the 1920s. They were sort of lionized and idealized. So that may be a twisted American tradition that we have here. Bonnie and Clyde, you can probably make the argument about that as well, right? Sometimes people who do terrible things get turned into these sort of, folk heroes among a portion of the electorate and society. But because of who Charlie Kirk was, because of this moment that we're in right now, because of who Donald Trump is, because of the close association, I think again this has just been so much more widespread than what we've seen before. This callousness, this refusal to recognize an individual's humanity, and I talked about this too with terms of what we do at Bearing Arms. It is look, it's not uncommon for folks on our side to dehumanize gun control activists, right? The only reason that they're going after our guns is because they're monsters. They want to disarm us. They want to turn us into slaves. In some cases, there's a refusal to recognize that, no, this is their response. However wrong-headed it might be, this is their response to try to spare others the pain of losing a child in a school shooting. I've never, I don't think, dehumanized or vilified Fred Gutenberg, or any other gun control activist for taking the positions that they take. I will criticize their ideas. I will criticize the policies that they promote, but I'm not going to go after, Joaquin Oliver for being a gun control activist because his son was murdered. I can say I think it's a terrible idea to do an AI interview with his, an avatar of his son. I think it's a terrible idea to, call for bans on commonly owned firearms in the idea that that's going to stop these school shootings. But I recognize the pain that these individuals have gone through. And I recognize the simple fact that they're flesh and blood human beings who who've experienced a terrible loss, and I can relate to them on some level. I think if we're looking for ways, honestly, I think if we're looking for ways to relate with people, we can generally find one. I think one of the problems that we have right now is that we're told not to look for ways to relate to people we disagree with. We're told to otherize them, to depersonalize this, to think of anybody who may have a different opinion than ours as some them or they who want to murder us, right? I mean, we literally heard that from Representative Nancy Mace this week. She said, Democrats, if you disagree with a Democrat, they want to kill you. I know Democrats who don't want to kill me. I've sat down at a table with Democrats who don't want to kill me. I know that that's not the truth. And I firmly believe that stating that as the truth takes us further down this very, very dark road that we're on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can see some of the similar reactions to other, whether it's the murder of the Democratic Speaker of the House in Minnesota, or the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband. There was a lot of similar reactions from, I think, in both cases, mostly people who are not in the leadership of our political movements, but maybe more than we'd like to see, right? But it's a pervasive thing from what I can tell, and you're absolutely right that these two biggest examples of these public executions were celebrated and have been celebrated by an unfortunately substantial number of people on the far left in the U.S. here, and it's a huge problem, I think, because I tend to think it's not that it's a more general problem for our entire society, right? That this is something that we could get drawn into, more political violence, escalating political violence over things like this. And I guess one of the things that you wrote about is what should we do? What should perhaps the people who have their head on a bit more straight than some of the ones celebrating these sorts of horrendous violent actions. What should we do? How should we react? How have you reacted in scenarios where people, were personally quite cruel to you in response to the death of your family?
Yeah, and I wrote that hate is a choice, right? And I believe that. I mean, I certainly could have responded to those individuals. I could have, lashed out at them. I could have wished the same horrible pain on them that I was going through at the time. But I think that, and I even said, professionally speaking, that might have been the right choice for me to make, right? Because we live in a media environment that rewards rage and anger, and we want to generate that emotional response that leads to clicks, leads to more eyeballs, and the easiest emotions to generate or manipulate fear and anger, right? I mean, that's it.
Yeah, that's part of our media environment, and in fact, that's one of the key connections that I see between this assassination of Charlie Kirk and the United Healthcare assassination is this media environment that it's happening in. It was one of the things that makes me so concerned about it, because it does harken back a bit. I wrote a piece on this at the Reload, but it harkens back to Columbine and why that killing has been so influential for so long. I mean, you're still seeing people. In fact, even this week we had another school shooting, and I wouldn't be surprised if you saw some of this similarities, some of the similar playbook at work there from Columbine, which happened years ago. But the even more pertinent example is in the immediate aftermath of the United Healthcare assassination. We saw a school shooting where the shooter was explicitly referencing, this is a 15-year-old shooter, explicitly referencing Columbine shooting, wearing the same band shirt, obvious references to that killing. That happened 10 years before this shooter was even born.
Yeah.
And it's still affecting in this horrible negative way our culture. It still exists as this template for how people can carry out these kinds of attacks. I don't want to go too deep on this, but that's what concerns me about United Healthcare and this shooting is very similar as far as the media environment. Columbine happened in this new media environment of the 24-hour cable news, and the internet was just becoming widely adopted. And so the manifestos circulated, the detailing of every moment of what happened became a commonplace. You know, the United Healthcare killing happened at the moment of sort of TikTokification of our media, where short form video can travel the world. Everybody has seen that killing, and everybody has seen this Charlie Kirk killing too. Like, it's so many people, it's hard to avoid now.
Yeah, I think you're right to talk about this, because I think that that is salient to what we're going through right now. And you know, there is this. I mean, look, you know, it may have been easy for me to choose not to hate because I'm not terminally online. You know, I don't really have a social media presence. I made that conscious decision too, that I really felt that social media was bad for me. Again, not a wise career decision for me to make, to step away from social media. And I may pay the price one day for that professionally, but personally, social media, I think, is generally worse for me than it was better for me. And I have no real regrets about stepping away from social media. And, you know, I'll follow you. I still use Twitter passively. Like, I'll see what's going on in the world. I'll, you know, check out your Twitter feed or your X feed. Rob Romano with Firearms Policy Coalition is another great resource, Costas Moros. But generally speaking, I don't feel the need to get involved in, you know, online arguments or debates. I think that you know, just again, I think it's bad for me. And I think it's generally bad for us as a society because social media does encourage this sort of negative feedback loop. And you're right that we have these subcultures that, you know, 30 or 40 years ago could not have connected with one another. Maybe on, you know, Usenet, right? But even then, the internet was a niche thing. Now with everybody having access to smartphones, everybody online, it is so much easier for these individuals, whether we're talking about, you know, the nihilists who just want to see the world burn, or this subculture that glorifies and is fascinated by school shootings and mass shootings in general. They can find each other. They can talk to each other. They can amplify each other's messages, right? And that is, again, that's a problem. Now, I'm as much a First Amendment supporter as I am a Second Amendment supporter. So I'm not calling for the internet to be shut down, right? Or for social media to be banned. I don't know what the answer is, other than, you know, just as we need to be safe and responsible gun owners, we need to be safe and responsible smartphone owners as well. We need to recognize that, you know, harm can be done. And I think you're starting to see that maybe with laws that are, you know, targeting teens' use of social media. I don't know how effective those are going to be, quite honestly. But, you know, I think you are hitting on something really important, and that is technology has advanced to the point that I don't know that it's fair to call a lot of these people lone wolves, even though they might be acting on their own. They are a part of a community. And in many cases, we see that, you know, with the shooting in Evergreen, Colorado this week, Jefferson County, Colorado, the authorities say this individual was, you know, radicalized by an extremist network. We don't know what that was necessarily, but I'm guessing it wasn't, you know, the neighborhood Cub Scout meeting, right? I'm guessing he was radicalized online. And when you see the ubiquitous nature of, you know, these videos of Charlie Kirk being murdered, again, the glorification of the Columbine killers. I mean, there are people who get these guys tattooed on them. You know, I mean, I don't know. And this is where I struggle, because this is where I don't know how to respond to that. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of counter push to that. But I don't know how that's done organically in a way that it's not, you know, it can't be me or you or some other individual standing up there and kids don't don't glorify the Columbine killers. Like, that's not going to work. I don't know where that counter comes from, but I know that it's desperately needed.
I mean, I think you've certainly identified a lot of things that are part of the problem here. I think, and again, like, part of it is just we're in a new media moment, and these particular murders have been carried out in a way that made them, intentionally or not, I tend to think intentionally, certainly in the case of the United Healthcare shooting, and likely intentionally in this case too. I mean, you don't shoot someone who's known for going to college campuses to debate people and have 100, like lots of people are going to be there filming it and live streaming it as you kill them. I think that's likely intentional, but they're done in a way that really is engineered to get attention in the way that our media works now, not news media necessarily, not broadcast media, but this new media, this short form video media, the landscape that really dominates now. And so that's what concerns me about it. It's like the connection.
Look at how many killers over the past couple of years have live streamed what they're doing. Right. I mean, that alone, they'll go on Twitch, they'll go on YouTube. They want people to be watching. So they're absolutely aware of how this new media environment operates, and they are taking advantage of that. I mean, you're spot on when you talk about it.
I agree with you as far as like the corrosive nature of social media and the moment that we're in. I also don't spend a lot of time I share the reload stories wherever I think our audience is going to be and wants to read them. But I used to be way more active on places like Twitter, or Instagram, or any of these social media places. I used to be a lot more active in sharing my views. And look, it's not that I don't do it at all anymore. I probably still do it more than I should, honestly. But I too I'm less engaged. Things have become so toxic. And now, someone like, whatever you thought of Charlie Kirk, him being murdered in the middle of a debate he was having with somebody is going to make, I think, a lot of people want to disengage even more. It just ups the ante for what, is you're not just worried about getting dogpiled on social media. Now you have to worry about being murdered. And not that it's not the first person to be assassinated, of course, but that's certainly, I feel like, one of the effects it's going to have, right?
I think you're right. I mean, I think, I think it also more broadly is going to have an impact on the idea that debate is worthwhile. Tom Knighton has a piece coming out at Bearing Arms this weekend in which he talks about, listen, Charlie did believe in the power of debate, and he was murdered. So, does debate have any power? Is there any point in talking to the other side? And I think a lot of people are going to come to the conclusion that no, there's not, which I think is a conclusion that Charlie would vehemently disagree with.
I would imagine you disagree with it as well, right?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, listen, just from a self-preservation standpoint, and as a student of history, civil wars don't turn out well. I have yet to see the country that has emerged from a civil war better off than it was before. And I would argue that includes the United States in the 1860s, right? I mean, there was a lot of damage done. The South did not recover for, you could argue, 100 years or more from the Civil War, right? So this sort of, romanticized, idealized notion that, we just put words aside and we duke it out and, to the victor goes the spoils. What happens in the meantime when you can't take your kids to school because school's shut down because of, bomb threats every day, or God forbid, actual bombs? What happens when our foreign adversaries realize how weak we are because we're fighting internally and decide, now's the time not only to move against our allies, but to move against us as well? What happens when the things that you take for granted, you were already complaining about the price of groceries going up. What happens when, products can't come to market because of IEDs on the interstate, right? I mean, it is asinine to think that a civil war would improve things in this society. As bad as they are right now, that's only going to make it worse. And so if that is true, and I believe that fundamentally to be true, then yes, discourse has to remain an option. And we have to figure out a way to talk to each other, to disagree with one another, to carve out enough living space where these disparate ideologies can coexist, even in conflict at some level, but where we don't constantly feel like I'm being deprived of my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by the other political ideology, right?
Yeah, I mean that's another thing I wanted to get out here, because obviously in the pro Second Amendment space, like there's a core belief that armed resistance is can be necessary in response to tyranny, to prevent tyranny or throw off tyranny. That's sort of there, and it's not, it's something that gets associated with the right or the gun rights movement, which is larger than just the right, but is primarily on the right. But I think this is more of an American ideal at core, right? That a lot of Americans hold to be true, that armed resistance can be necessary at some point, and the difficulty of that. Right. And this has been a tension I've wanted to talk about for a long time. Something we talked a little bit about when I had Carl on the show, and because he was highlighting a lot of concerns that more civil libertarian minded or people, or even left of center minded gun owners have with the state of politics right now. But also, wanted to highlight that violence is not the correct response here. When people in America tend to feel like, oh, my side is being, is under attack, is being oppressed. What I think it's important to articulate and understand what it even means to say that armed resistance is the answer. Like when that point would actually happen, because I think I can assume fairly safely here that you do not think we're anywhere near that point based on what you just said and just based on knowing you. So I think it's important to articulate why, whether you're on the right or left. Charlie Kirk was just murdered. There's all kinds of things that people are upset about on the left with, I don't even want to get into the specific issues necessarily, but I just want to, talk more broadly about this. That is something that we go to, and it is something that you see as sort of this almost glorification of violent action, whether it's far left or far right, as the right course here. Yeah. Almost over anything. And so I think, can you articulate just where does that line actually fall, and why are we anywhere near it?
I mean, we're probably closer than we've been at a lot of points in history, but I don't think we're there yet. Maybe the 15-yard line, but we're not not quite near the end zone. And going back to what I said, maybe the War of Independence was the one example of a civil war that the aftermath, the country was stronger, but that created a new nation, right?
It was a revolution, right?
And so
I guess what I'm trying to get at is more just like, when is the point? Like, what are the things that would make you say no today? Like, why wouldn't this be justified? Why not Charlie Kirk in particular, but any sort of political violence? So
go back to 1776, right? And you can say, well, the Parliament tried to impose taxes. Well, okay, so why didn't we go to war over the income tax? And it wasn't just the taxation issue, right? It was the issue that at that point, the colonies had been around for, in some cases, over 150 years. They had no representation in Parliament, but they had been largely allowed to govern themselves through colonial assemblies. Yes, there was a royal governor who would sort of keep watch over things, but they had a voice, they had a say, and then that was stripped from them. And Parliament basically said, you're going to do what we tell you to do. You have no rights. We will dissolve your legislatures. We will not allow your assemblies to meet. We will arrest your representatives if they try to meet. Right? That's tyranny. If the federal government, whether it's, the Trump administration or let's go say the Gavin Newsom administration, in a few years, if they went into, every state capitol building and locked it down, brought in the National Guard, maybe had the California National Guard go to Austin, Texas, and lock it down, lock the legislators out. No reason for this anymore. This is an unlawful assembly. That'd be tyranny, right? If we are told we can't have midterm elections, I think that would edge closer to tyranny. A declaration of, a national emergency, or if the results of these elections were thrown out, clearly fraudulently, in order to, maintain one party's position of power. I think you could argue that would be an act of tyranny. But even then, Stephen, I would say that the answer is not, I'm going to get my AR-15 and start shooting from the rooftops, right? I mean, you look at what happened. If we believe that, the Second Amendment encompasses a right to armed resistance to tyranny, I would argue, is that right an individual right? Or now are we talking about that individual right to own, to keep and bear arms for, among other things, collective self-defense against tyranny? And, you look at what Madison wrote, I think it was Federalist 42 or 46. I can never keep it straight. But that's the one where he talked about, okay, so what happens if we have a tyrannical government? One of those checks on that tyrannical government is the body of the people who have the right to keep and bear arms. But that was one aspect of that. The other aspect of that was, okay, so the people have, they get the ability to form a militia. They can elect officers from within their own ranks. States can resist tyranny from the federal government. And when you have, the states affecting this tyranny, affecting this resistance, that involves, militias, that involves individual gun owners, that would be an effective check on the federal government, right? And so I think even then, when we're talking about resistance to government tyranny, we're talking about collective action. It's not Joe Schmo blowing, or it's not Tim McVeigh blowing up a federal building, right? It's not somebody, taking a hunting rifle and murdering Charlie Kirk. It's not taking a hammer to Paul Pelosi, right? That's not resistance to tyranny. That's crime. And so,
Absolutely.
That I think is, I think it's a very juvenile view of resistance to tyranny, quite honestly. And if we want to talk about, checks on tyranny, I think that's where we're talking about, yes, the Second Amendment has a role to play, but that's not the only thing, right? The Second Amendment is the break glass in case of emergency right when it comes to protecting.
The last resort.
Absolutely. But, Joe Biden was right when he said, well, we got F-15s, right? Yeah, they do have F-15s and we have AR-15s. So you can look at, Vietnam, you can look at Afghanistan. You could say you could wage some, guerrilla war. I don't think I'd look at Afghanistan as an example of a stable society. Right. So, any successful resistance to tyranny is going to have to necessarily involve the other checks and balances that the founding fathers put in place here. Right. And I think it's silly to ignore those checks and balances when they are also an inherent part of preventing tyranny, but also resisting tyranny if it gets established.
And just to, I very much agree with your point of view on this, in the sense that, from what I understand of what you're saying, and feel free to correct me if I got any of this wrong, but essentially, the founder, if you look at the founders as an ideal example of resisting tyranny, and look back to them for where this ideal comes from, at least in America. These concepts predate America, but we're Americans, and this is where we look to as our founding for these ideas. But you can go and read the Declaration of Independence, and it lists a whole long train of abuses. It's not just one thing at one moment. It was decades of abuses that culminated in some of the stuff you talked about. But obviously, we're on a podcast, so we could talk about the abuses of the king at the founding era. You can do a whole series on that, right? But which is the point. It wasn't just one thing, and it wasn't an overnight. It was, and it developed over time, and it was a lot of problems, and it was to the point where society degraded, and there were no longer other ways to resist the usurpations of rights. That was the problem, is that they didn't have courts that were properly functioning. They didn't have the legislation that he took. What the king had done at the time was take away all of those options and left them with essentially, the last resort, which was armed revolution. And so you have to, then to Charlie Kirk's credit, I've seen video from 2021 where he was essentially asked the same question, and his answer was, effectively that, so long as there are other means to resist the policies that you don't like, even if you view them as infringing on your rights, as long as there are other means before armed violence, those are the appropriate things to do, that you would need to exhaust all of those before you could justifiably claim to be carrying out violence in the name of, protecting your rights or your country's rights. I think that's sort of a fair, especially because, as you mentioned earlier, the realities of what this means. Armed fight would be horrendous. We just seen a horrible assassination that I don't think anyone in their right mind can feel positive things. But we talked about, some people are claiming to be happy about this, and that's disturbing in and of itself. But any normal person would be repulsed.
You have no concept of or understanding of history and what this would, what that would mean. Now, again, am I glad that we have that right? Do I believe that we have that right? Absolutely. I hope, again, though, that we never get to the point where we view that as the best option. But even then, I'll go back, and I think it's important to note that, even in the War of Independence, we're not talking about, individual actors, right? It wasn't Paul Revere squaring off against the Redcoats at Lexington Green, right? He went to warn the militia. And who was hiding out in Lexington at the time? You had Sam Adams, you had John Hancock, who were wanted by the British because they were legislators who wanted to continue legislating, who continued to view themselves as the rightful guardians, or at least, rightful officials there in, the Massachusetts colony. So the founding fathers did not believe in just, mob violence, and certainly did not believe in, lone wolf violence, right? If you're going to, if you get to the point where tyranny has been established and there needs to be resistance to tyranny, then you're going to have a collective response, and it is going to have to be as broad and as wide a response throughout society as possible. It's just common sense, because otherwise that resistance is going to collapse. So,
and look, to be fair, we don't know exactly what motivated this shooter. We have some indications, obviously. Who he shot is always an important thing, but assassins throughout history have tended to be not as ideological as a lot of the tendency for most people is to try and put them into some sort of ideological motivation. This guy, he had wrote messages on the ammunition, as Luigi Mangione did, although he wasn't
allegedly
the first one to do that.
He hasn't been tried yet, so want to make sure you
don't
get in trouble.
Allegedly, not to prejudge any of this stuff, but the messages could be read a couple of different ways. Some of them are apparently references to memes. So this guy, as you alluded to earlier, does seem very internet poisoned in that regard. But also they are common like anti-fascist messages. So he may have been trying to claim that Kirk was a fascist and is justified. And as we're making very clear here, I think, he's not in any way justified and could not be justified on what he's done. And that anyone who thinks that they should repeat something like this on either side of the political aisle would not be justified either in doing it, and only serve to make things much worse, despite the fact that they are already quite terrible. But I wanted to get back to the closing message from your piece, because I thought it's important, and I'd like to close on it here. But you start by saying, I don't think we can come back from this moment of political tension, but I do believe we can get through it. And then, you talk about what we can do as individuals. So what are you, how do you see a way forward here? And what do you think we should do in response to this terrible shooting?
Again, this is just, I don't even know if this is this is just what I would do as an individual. And that is to, again, look for that commonality. Try to find people on the other side who are also looking for that commonality, who maybe that is the commonality, right? Maybe the commonality is just like, I don't want to see it burn. Maybe that's the point of agreement right now, right? It's not abortion. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not healthcare. It's not universal basic income. It's just, I don't want to see the country burn to the ground. We can both agree on that. Well, there's a starting point, right? Keep that hate out of your heart. It is not a good way to live. It's a terrible way to live when you're just poisoned by hate. Look for, those opportunities in life to do good for other people. I would say, again, I didn't include this in my piece, but don't get so wrapped up online that you are not having face-to-face conversations with people. Because it is much easier to view people as your existential enemy when you're not looking them in the eye. And continue to advocate for what you believe, right? Don't let this silence you. Don't let this force you into the shadows. If you still, we were talking about this earlier, right? I mean, how many people are going to be afraid of debate now? We can't let that be the norm, right? So I would say continue to take part in civic society. Show up at town hall meetings. Go to your school board meetings. Go to your city council meetings. Voice your opinion. Vote. Continue to get organized, right? If we are worried about the state of our, whether you want to call it a democracy or a representative republic, if you're worried about the state of our civic society, then work to strengthen it. And to be what you want to see, essentially, right? What you think is lacking, try to put that out there yourself. And, no matter how involved or uninvolved you are, again, just how we operate in our day-to-day life, I think can go at least some ways towards ratcheting down the tension and, again, finding that common ground on some level.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better, I think. So I really appreciate you coming on here, Cam, and especially last moment and in such a troubling time for our politics and bringing us some light into the situation. I really appreciate you doing this. But for people who want to hear more from you, want to read this piece that we've discussed, where can they do that?
Sure. And again, I appreciate the invite, Stephen. I don't know how. I don't feel like I'm a very smart guy, but this is, and I hate this phrase, but this is my truth, right? And so I appreciate you letting me talk about it. So yeah, bearingarms.com. That's the website. I do Bearing Arms Cam and Company, which is our podcast Monday through Thursday. I'm putting you on notice, Stephen. You're going to be on the show one day next week. We'll figure out what day that'll be. So folks can find it on, YouTube, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms. And again, I really appreciate you allowing me this opportunity to talk about this, Stephen. This has been a painful week, a terrible week, and there is a large part of me that doesn't want to talk about it. It'd be very easy to just sort of wall myself up and try to shut out the world, but I don't think that's the right thing to do at this point. So thank you.
Absolutely, and like I said, I just appreciate your voice and being here and going through this with us. But that's all we've got for you guys this week. We will see you again real soon.